Hello, everybody. This is Kat Eng from Barrett-Koehler Publishers in San Francisco. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have Dick and Emily Axelrod here joining us. Dick and Emily, thanks for joining us, and we're really looking forward to today's webinar, Let's Stop Meeting Like This. Before we get into it, I wanted to go over just a couple things on your dashboard so you know how they work. You guys should all notice that there's something that says questions or chat. This is your place to actually type questions to our presenters. So you can type them at any time. And I will actually read the questions to the authors so that they can answer them for you live. You'll hear your answers while we're in this broadcast. So I wanted to point that out. If you want to go ahead and try typing something, you're more than welcome to. I will see it. If you have any technical difficulties at any point, if something doesn't sound right or you're having issues of some kind, you can also chat to me there as well. We are also live tweeting today's event, so if you're on Twitter, you can follow us at BKPub, and we're using the hashtag #EndBadMeetings. It's MTGS, so that's hashtag #EndBadMeetings. And I'm going to get us started with a quick poll here. We'd love to hear why you guys joined today's webinar. And it should get started in just a second here. And we'll give you guys just a minute to fill that out. We have about 25% have voted. We'll just take another 15 seconds or so. Now we're getting some interesting results here. Okay, so I'll go ahead and I'm going to close this poll now. You may vote now or forever hold your peace. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here we go. Close poll. And let's see those results. So as you'll notice, it looks like it's actually split pretty evenly. And Dick and Emily, thanks again for joining us. You guys actually haven't had a chance to introduce yourselves yet. Would you like to talk about these results very quickly? What do you notice from this?
Well, okay, I'm Dick Axelrod, and I'm one of the co-authors in Let's Stop Meeting Like This. The one that strikes me is the sense of being stuck in meetings that aren't relevant to my job, and that oftentimes people don't know why they're in meetings and what they're supposed to be doing there, and there's always this tension between the tension people feel between doing, quote, their work and whatever the work of the meeting is called for. And so that was the one that stood out for me.
My meetings run too long. Stands out for me. I think one of the things that we get into is too many side tracks when we get in meetings, and it's my experience is it's difficult to stay focused. I'll give you a little story about my frustration with meetings. Back in my PTA days, I was in a meeting where they took 2 hours to make a decision on the color of the trays in the cafeteria. And that to me was what sent me back to work, which I'm not so sure was much better. But I do agree that can happen, and that's really when people lose focus and whoever is leading the meeting really doesn't help folks stay on task and on time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to give control over to you, Dick and Emily, and you can take it away with your presentation.
Okay. Oh, do we have that other poll too about the number of meetings, or is that?
We do. We have a couple of other polls.
Yeah. Why don't we put that one up? Right
Okay.
now too.
Great. So this is how many meetings are held daily in the U.S. Here's another moment for everybody to get involved.
Just take a guess. It's funny, we sit here and you can't see anything happening.
Yeah, so we have about 25% of everybody has voted. Let's give another 15 seconds or so. We've at 75%. And okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. And you should see the results in just a second here.
Hey, we got a smart group. There's 25 million per day in the U.S. Now let's quickly do that other poll. So we got 25 million meetings happening every day. And the next question is, what percentage are unproductive? 75, 67, 36, or 15?
I bet a lot of people didn't know that they were going to be quizzed today, huh?
Starting off with a test, right?
It's true. I have to say, I always like to pop quiz, so, something fun about doing multiple choice. Okay, so we have about 57% of everybody has voted. We'll wait another 10 seconds. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and close this poll now and share the results.
Okay. And we're right again.
You guys read the same studies that we did.
So 2/3 are unproductive. So all that says is there's lots of room for improvement. And so let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do here today. We really want to share some of the ideas and thoughts that we have about our book, Let's Stop Meeting Like This. We're going to spend a little time saying why we wrote the book, and then what we think are the 4 big ideas contained within the book. Then we'll pause for some Q&A, and then we'll go into meeting basics and tips for leaders, contributors, and facilitators. So that's the structure of what we're going to do here today. And Emily told you one of her reasons for writing the book, which is her great PTA story. The other thing that started to happen to us is we've been using the concepts in the book for many, many years. And one day our son called us up, and at the time he was a professional ski instructor, and he said, "Hey, Mom and Dad, you know that meeting canoe framework you use? Well, I started using it to structure my ski lessons. And if you're a ski instructor, one of the little secrets about ski lessons is you make more money when people request you or if they come back for another lesson." And all of a sudden he said, "I'm now the most requested ski instructor on the mountain." And what he began to do was use some of the ideas that we're going to talk about here today to kind of structure his lesson and find out, he would end up spending more time connecting with people and finding out why they were there. They might say something like, "I want to learn how to ski black diamonds," but the real reason they wanted to be able to ski black diamonds was that their kids could ski black diamonds. And they wanted to be able to ski with their kids. Or he would begin to spend time at the end of the lesson reviewing the lesson and giving people tips for what they could practice on. And so, Dave called and said, "Yeah, that framework really works for me, and I taught it to some of my buddies, and their rankings have also improved." And then one day we were working with one of our clients, and again talking about the meeting canoe as a framework, and he said, "That meeting canoe framework you taught us, we've now adopted that for all our meetings." And we were really kind of floored by that, because at the time that was just a 1-hour segment in a 3-day workshop, and for it to have that kind of impact. And so we began to think that some of these ideas really had value for others. And then one day we were working with a client, and they said, "Well, we do everything the meeting books say we should do to have better meetings, and they're still terrible." And I didn't say this to him, but I said it in my head, was, "Well, you know what? I think we've got some ideas about why that happens." And so all those things kind of spurred us to write the book. So in the book there are, do I have control, Cat? Yeah, okay, good. There are 4 big ideas. Meetings as places where work gets done. Meetings are a snapshot of your organization's culture. That meetings are leverage points for change, and the meeting canoe. And so we'll be going through these ideas one by one.
Slide. So this is just I'm going to apologize for my voice right up front because I've got a frog in my throat and I've been trying to get rid of it for the last 3 hours and it won't go away, so I'll just be froggy today. So we think of meetings as a place where work gets done in timely manners. And one of the things that we think about are 5 different ways of looking at work. The first one is autonomy. Autonomy is when everybody gets an opportunity to be influenced and to influence other people in the meeting. The other thing is that meetings have to have meaning to you. If they don't have any meaning, what point? To me, it's like the color of trays in the cafeteria. That had absolutely no meaning to me at all. The other thing is challenge. And meetings, I love a meeting where you have a big juicy issue or problem and you have to go into it and try to find a way to solve it. It just arouses the curiosity and the way that all of the possibilities can come together to resolve the issue. The other thing about meetings is that we also want to have meetings where we come away and we've learned something new. And the final thing is feedback. And with all meetings, we need some sort of feedback, some sort of way. Did we have a good meeting? Or even as a meeting participant, you get feedback when you give an idea and somebody says, that's a really good idea. So it comes in different forms. And all of these are ways in which you can look at a meeting in a different way than looking at the agenda, how long we're going to speak, etc., all of these kind of things. So when you have a meeting, you really want to use this as a framework to begin to look at meetings also.
So the interesting thing about these 5 categories of autonomy, meaning, challenge, learning, and feedback they are the same things that have been found that to make work engaging, so that if you begin to think of your meeting as a place where work gets done, then you have to build them into your meeting structure and into your meeting design. Then the other thing that happened to us is Emily and I were doing a workshop and talking about these concepts, and in the audience was a video game, CEO of a video game company. And Colin came up to us after the meeting and he said, you know, when we design video games, these are the same things that we use when we design the game, that there needs to be some autonomy so people have control over the game and how they're going to play it and at what level they're going to play it. The game has to have some meaning, so they has to have some interest to them. The challenge has to be somewhere above their current skill level and somewhat so that they have some impetus to try and get better. Then you also, just to go back to autonomy for a second, they build in autonomy by letting you decide the level at which you're going to play, how long you're going to play, when you're going to play. So all those factors are built into the game. If people don't learn something into the game, they don't stay with it. And the notion of feedback in any video game, you get instantaneous feedback about how well you're doing. So it was quite interesting to us that these concepts that make productive work also make video games engaging and challenging, and we think lead to productive meetings. So the next piece is that meetings are a snapshot of your organization's culture. And we love this cartoon from the New Yorker, you know, and with these folks even getting naked didn't help their meeting. But the thing that we think about is that if you look at what's going on in the meeting, it gives you lots of information about an organization's culture. It tells you about communication patterns. It tells you about how information is shared. It tells you about how decisions are made, how they deal with authority. So the meetings are sort of this snapshot that gives you a picture of what's going on in an organization, and even the shape of the meeting room will tell you things. So one of our clients used to have these meetings rooms where you'd have a table that was laid out in a T, and on the horizontal part of the T was an LCD projector, and then you had people sitting on the length of the T, but then you also had people in another row of chairs sitting around the people who were sitting at the table. So there were all kinds of issues of whether you had a seat at the table or if you didn't have a seat at the table. So we believe there's a lot to learn about an organization's culture from the meetings, and that if you can begin to change the way you meet, you can begin to shift an organization's culture.
We also believe that meetings are big leverage points for change. If you think about any kind of a change project that you go through, there are lots and lots of meetings. And if you think about those as every time you have a meeting, it's an opportunity for engagement. It's an opportunity to influence and be influenced. And so they're really leverage points in the organization for change. The other thing is that the way that you have a meeting, if people come out of that meeting with a positive affect, that's going to influence not only the change project, but influence the rest of their day. So if those things can be productive, people can feel good about them, they can walk out and feel good, that changes the whole tenor of what's going on about how I'm thinking about the work that I'm doing. And so that's kind of a ripple effect that can go out into your organization in terms of a way to begin to look at building positive meetings in a positive culture.
The next big idea is what we call the meeting canoe. So the meeting canoe is a different kind of agenda. A lot of emphasis when you look at what people are saying about meetings is the emphasis is on how do you move through the agenda items quickly, which is sort of what we call an efficiency mindset when it comes to meetings. And it's not that we're against efficiency, but if you have efficient bad meetings, all you've done is minimize the pain. And so we want to have efficient, productive meetings, and we believe that the meeting canoe is a way to structure the agenda so that the beginning of the canoe, we talk about you have to welcome people and it's not just welcoming people, it's how do you help people feel welcome in the meeting. You can think of how many meetings I attend where people don't even know the names of people who are sitting across from them. And then the next task is you have to connect people to each other and to the task or the purpose of the meeting. So that's the kind of foundation building of the meeting. And then what you do is you discover the way things are, and that the operative word here is discover. So how can we engage in conversations where we understand what's going on in our situation? And you don't do that through 50 PowerPoints. And the next thing is eliciting people's dreams. And so we're not asking you what you dreamt last night, but we're asking you at this point, what are your hopes for the future? What are you trying to create here? What's going to be different because this group of people came together and met? And then the last two sections are about deciding, because at some point you have to make some decisions, and at the point at which you decide, you narrow some possibilities because you've eliminated some options, but you also open up the opportunity for the options that you've decided to pursue. And then the last piece is attend to the end. So how do you bring closure to the meeting? So this is one view of the meeting canoe. This is a top view, okay, so what it would look like if you were looking down on it. And we like this representation because we think the meeting canoe also represents a conversation that starts out narrow in the beginning as you begin to welcome people and have them begin to connect to each other and their work. And at the widest point, you have, which is the point at which you have the most possibilities, you're discovering the way things are, and you're eliciting the dream. So you're trying to get a sense of what's our current reality and what's the future we're trying to create. And when you have these conversations about the way things are now and what you're trying to create in the future, you create what Robert Fritz calls structural tension. And this tension is kind of like a rubber band that propels people towards the future. So if you only know about the way things are, then you have no hope, and you have nothing that propels you as you move forward.
You get depressed.
You get depressed, actually, is what the studies show. That's right. And if you only are thinking about the future, but that's not grounded in any sense of reality, then you're kind of Pollyannish. So the way this structural tension works is, if you know your current situation, and if you know the way you'd like things to be, then you begin to see new possibilities. And the example we always like to use is if you're about to buy a new car. If you know that you don't like your car, or your car is broken, or you just plain hate it, and you know you want to bring a new car into your life, you're going to see the advertisements for those new cars everywhere. And in fact, if you know the make and model, you're going to see the make and model. So this is the middle section here, is where we create this tension, the structural tension, and we've got the most possibilities. And then the canoe narrows as we decide on next steps, and we begin to attend to the end. So one thing about the canoe, we were talking with an architect one time. So we were working with an organization about creating a new hospital, and I was talking with him in the hall during a break, complaining about the kind of meeting rooms we meet in. And he said that the way people enter a space and the way people leave a space is as important as what happens in the space. And that always stuck with us, and we think that's important when it comes to meetings, that how you welcome, how people enter the space, how you welcome them, and how you connect with them, and how they leave, how they feel at the end, really is as important as what goes on in the meeting. So now we're going to kind of go through these in a little more detail, each element.
So the welcome and connection to me sometimes can feel like the same. The welcome is really creating a welcoming space. It's wanting to have a space that is welcoming, that we would say natural light, round tables if possible, all of those kind of things. A lot of times you have people, if you're having a team meeting, at least when people walk in the door, you want to say hello, how are you? So you want to acknowledge people. The other thing is that you want to connect people to the purpose of the meeting and to what the task is of that meeting as they're going forward, and to each other. So if you have a new member or somebody coming in to give new information, you want to make sure that you connect people to those folks. The reason that we do that is because it creates safety. And one of the things that we know from neuroscience is that when people feel safe, that their brain is more in the collaborative and creative mode. We also know that what we typically do is that we search for danger 10 times more than we would search for safety. So therefore, we want to do something that helps people feel like it's safe, or to talk about things that might be difficult, or to bring up issues that aren't. And one of the ways you can do that is to connect people. So that's really the welcoming space, and welcoming people and connecting them to the task and to each other.
Yeah, so it's important that people feel connected to each other and to the work, and also to what they care about. And so those are the connecting pieces. And then what we're trying to do, again, with the Discover the Way Things Are, is create this shared view of reality. So do we all understand what's going on here? And to make sense of that reality. A mistake that I see many leaders make, this was again driven home to me last week with a client, is when the leader is presenting some information, they know that information, they understand that information. It's very familiar to them. But the people in the room may be seeing it for the first time. So you need to provide some opportunity and some discussion time where people can talk among themselves and make sense of it, so that they understand it and can realize the importance of the information that's being presented.
One of the metaphors that always helps me understand that is you can think about the leader is at the beginning of the race or the marathon, and the rest of the folks are following along, and they can't see the same things that the leader sees. And I think that's true. It's what Dick says. If that's my job as a leader, then I've been dealing with this for the last 6 months or 6 weeks or whatever. And so I understand it. But if this is the first time I hear it, then I don't understand exactly what they're talking about. I understand my piece of that.
And then it's about our dreams. It's what's our hope, and to begin to have conversations about what's our preferred future. And as I said earlier, what we're doing is creating this tension between getting a shared sense of the way things are, and then also a shared agreement and understanding of what it is we want to be different, what it is we want to create, what's going to be the result of all of the work that we do here, and difference for ourselves as individuals, different for this group, and different for the organization as a whole.
And one of the things a lot of people say to me, I can't use that word dreams. So, you can just think about it as possibilities. So what are the possibilities? What are the ways that we want to solve this particular issue? You have to fit it to the culture in which you live. A woman from Gas and Oil said to me, there's no way in the world I'd ever use dreams in my meetings. So just think about where you come from and what kind of culture you are and what works in that culture in terms of language. Decision ground rules. One of the things that we think is really key is when you meet with any kind of group, no matter size or whatever, that there need to be real clear decision ground rules. So who's going to make the decision? How are we going to do it, and what will we decide? There are things where it's very clear. The leader comes in and he says, I'm going to make this decision. Here's the decision. I'm going to make it. I'm going to make the decision. I want your information, your consultation about this. Or it can be group, we have to make this decision. What do you think? You make the decision. But what needs to be clear to me if I am a participant in this meeting is, okay, who's going to make it? Do I have a voice in this or do I not? Otherwise, you're wasting my time. Just make it and let's move on. And then how will we make the decision? There are a lot of different ways to do that. There's voting, there's raising your hand, there's, yeah, I agree, yes, I can live with that. There's also working through any kind of differences that you might have and really coming to some sort of an understanding with that. And of course it has to be clear what the question is you're going to decide.
Yeah. The thing that we find in talking with people is that what makes people really angry is to think that they're in a discussion where they think that they have a vote, or that they're going to actually be part of the decision-making process, and to find out at the end that there's only really one decision here, and that was the idea that the leader wanted in the first place. So it's really important that if the leader is going to make the decision and they're just sharing information or they want some feedback on the decision, that's clear up front. Okay? People can live with that. They often say, well, I'm an adult, treat me like an adult, don't try and manipulate me. And the problem for a leader is if they start out wanting to look participatory and say the decision's participatory, and then the group starts going in a direction that they don't want them to go, they either have to pull back the decision from the group, which is not a good thing, or they end up living with a decision they can't support, which is not a good thing. So our advice is really be clear about these decision rules before you start the meeting, and that they're as important as the way you make the decision.
And then attending to the end. We like to be clear about what the decisions are that are made and who's going to do what. So really want to follow through on that. I know a lot of meetings have little forms that they use that do that as you go through, which is really very helpful. And you can find a lot of those on the internet too. You also want to be clear about what are next steps. What's the next town we're going to hit on this trip, so to speak. And then the other piece that I think is really important and that we tend to omit more than anything else is reflecting on how the meeting went. So reflecting on what we got accomplished, so that's to the piece about what do we do well or what do we need to do differently next time, so that we learn from what we've done and we can also celebrate what we've been able to do, even if it's just 5 minutes. This is a piece that's really important. And to me, when I look at meetings, the two things that I see that get lost is, one, the front part in terms of welcoming people and connecting them, and this piece right here, attend to the end. People always get here and say, oh, we don't have time for this, and run out the door. And they lose a lot when they don't. So I'll be real, one of the things that I do is I just stop them and said, we've gone as far as we can go today, and we have to do this. We just make it a priority. So that's our bit.
Yeah, so these are actually, what Emily's talking about is to make the beginning pieces agenda items, the attend to the end agenda items, just like you make the middle pieces, which most people are pretty good at in terms of looking at where we are and where we need to be. So we've been talking a lot, and we'd like to just stop here and pause for a few minutes and respond to questions that you may have as a result of hearing what we've been talking about.
Okay, so we have a question here. This is a good one. If someone doesn't want to talk in a meeting due to shyness, introversion, etc., do you believe that the meeting structure should urge or force them to talk?
No.
No, I think you give people the opportunity to talk. And if you have people that are too shy, the other thing you can do is you can have people write things down. Perhaps they'd rather do things that way. I mean, if you had a number of people that did that. I think you invite people and they make a choice. If you know that that person has lots of good information, you might talk to that person before and ask how they could get that information into the meeting, if you felt like that was really important.
What we're really talking about is respecting people's autonomy, and
Sure.
And Peter Block has a great saying. He talks about, if I can't say no, my yes doesn't mean anything. So if you think about it, if I can't choose not to say something, then when I say something, it doesn't mean very much. So that's what we're really working on here.
Very good quote from another BK author, Peter Block. So here's a question. How should you decide who should be in what meetings? This is always a tough one for a lot of people.
Yeah. And it's something we'll talk about a little later, but it's purpose. Okay. And what's the purpose of the meeting? And then who do you need to be in that meeting to achieve that purpose? So if you're trying to build support for something, or you're trying to share information, you might have many more meeting attendees than if you're trying to work on some very detailed aspect of a plan. So for us, it's always, given the purpose, then who are the voices that need to be in the room?
Yes. So, and it sounds like what you're essentially saying too is you really should go into your meeting having a clear understanding of why you're doing it, not just to get people together, but to talk about something, but to really have a clearly defined goal for what you want to accomplish at the end of it.
And I think where people get sloppy on that, if you're going to do a one-day offsite or something like that, people really think that through pretty well. But it's the routine meetings that you might have had a clear purpose at the beginning, but that purpose gets lost over time. And so I think on regularly standing meetings, you need to go back and periodically say, okay, is this still the purpose or the reason that we're meeting, and do we still have the right people in the room?
I know at Intel, one of the things, any meeting they have to be very clear about the purpose, what we're going to discuss, and what we're going to decide. And that goes out to everybody before the meeting, no matter what kind of meeting they have. So I would say any meeting that I have, I really want to know what's gonna take place, because for me, then I'm going to think about, okay, what can I contribute and what do I need to get out of this meeting in order to do my job better? So we need to be, I'm with Dick. We get into a habit, and I'm just as guilty of that as anybody else, but we need to be real clear about why we're going to be there, because as I've looked at meetings and read all this data, and we go back to the 67% of people are dissatisfied with meetings, and that means that it costs $37 billion, etc. If I was head of a business corporation, I think you're going to see people paying more and more attention to this, because reality is what's happening is the number of meetings are increasing, they're not decreasing, and they've been increasing since 2008. And a lot of that has to do with technology, has to do with the complexity of organizations. But I think we've got to get better at this.
And just one other point is that I think a thing that often frustrates people is not having the decision makers in the room.
Yeah.
So you're in this meeting and you realize that the person who can say yes or no to this isn't there.
They've sent their
deputy or
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so now you're involved in another meeting, or you have to have another meeting to bring this person up to speed, or and it just the frustration cycle just keeps increasing. Are there questions out there, Kat?
So we don't have any additional questions for now. I do have questions, but we have I thought we could save a couple of them for the next portion of questions.
All right. Okay, so we're going to go now on to what we call, it's not.
Here we go.
Oh,
you skipped it.
Yeah. Okay.
Meeting basics.
We'll get there. Okay.
So we do believe in meeting basics, and this is what we call meeting basics. The first question to ask yourself, is a meeting necessary? Do we really need to get 5 people together to do this? The next one is, what's the purpose of getting these people together? What are they going to create? What are they going to decide? And the question that you all ask, whom to invite? Who is it really important to invite? When we think about getting people together for meetings, we think about who makes decisions, who has authority to do that, who has the information, who's it going to impact. Those are some of the categories of folks that we begin to think about, and then from there you can narrow it back down. And then who do you need to involve in the design? One of my things that I get all upset about is that in a meeting, everybody is really responsible. And we did a poll before we wrote the book, and we asked people, well, now who's responsible for the meeting? And I would say 90% of people said the leader is responsible for the meeting. Well, if you're in a meeting, then you have some responsibility to show up and be responsible to contribute in any way that you can. You have some part of the ownership of the meeting. So one of the ways that we try to do that is we try to, even on a weekly meeting, to get people's input into that meeting. So get them to help you design it. What does that mean? Maybe it means agenda item. I don't know. Maybe they've got some ways of doing things that are different from the way you do it that might be helpful. So just begin to think about that. And the other thing about meetings is where and how long. So one of the things in all the reading about meetings is I've found that people are looking at meetings like shorter meetings, stand-up meetings. We even have a client who has voluntary meetings. And I'll let Dick tell you that story because my voice is going. But you need to think about the space that you use the meeting in, and you need to think about exactly how long do we need to get done what we are going to do.
Okay. Just before I talk about the voluntary meetings, I want to make a back up and just say something about whom to involve in the design, because I think a lot of leaders cited agenda items, but I didn't get anything. And I think that's their attempt to involve people in the design of the meeting. But that still makes the meeting the leader's meeting. And so when you involve people in the design and you actually run them through the meeting canoe kind of questions about how do we make people welcome, how are we going to connect people to each other in the task. You go through each of those elements, you have a different kind of design, and then the ownership for the meeting starts to be shared, not just shared with the leader. So they have an investment.
There is a little story in our book at a hospital where there's a doc that has a weekly meeting, and he comes in, puts up the purpose on the board, the items he has, everybody that comes in put up their items, then they all decide together what are the ones that we really need to attend to today, and then they move through and do that. And that way everybody feels some sense of ownership of that meeting. So that's just another way of thinking about doing it. They get there a little early and put up their items.
Yeah. So I'll tell you now about voluntary meetings. Eric Lindblad is the VP of engineering for the 777 aircraft. And Eric's an interesting guy at Boeing because he's the kind of guy who goes around and goes to different parts of the company where they need to have some emphasis and new leadership. And so Eric's thing on meetings is he makes them all voluntary. And he says, you know, if you think you need to be someplace else, then I'm going to trust that you're going to make the best decision for yourself and for the company. And he also uses the fact that if people don't show up at a particular meeting as a feedback mechanism for his own meeting. So if people aren't attending his meetings, he doesn't beat people up about that, but he kind of looks at it and says, okay, what's wrong with this meeting? How can we improve it so that people want to attend? So I think one of the interesting things about Eric and doing this with his voluntary meetings is that he's trusting people that they will actually make the best decision, either for themselves or for the organization. And we just thought when we talked to Eric and talked about what he does with his meetings at Boeing, we just thought that was a really both interesting and radical approach to this issue of meeting attendance, and also about how to improve the quality of your own meetings.
It's also treating people like adults and knowing that if they can't be there, a lot of times they'll get the information other ways, you know.
Okay, so we're going to go into what we call tips for leaders, tips for contributors, and tips for facilitators. And so for leaders, one of the things we think about is that leaders have a lot of power. They can determine when people meet, they can determine where they meet, they can determine how long. You know, and I think Eric, who we just talked about, is a good example about how he used his power wisely. He made his meetings voluntary. The other thing Eric did was he set a rule that all meetings had to start and end at 10 minutes after the hour. So what they were finding was when they scheduled meetings using Outlook, that all the meetings started and began on the hour. So it was virtually impossible for anyone to actually be on time for a meeting. So he put that kind of structure. So no matter how long the meeting is, it starts and ends at 10 minutes after the hour. You can invite criticism by if you present an idea to the group, you can make it safe to criticize by saying, well, you know, while we're sitting in your shoes, I might think that was the craziest idea ever. So you begin to, in a playful way, kind of make it safe for people to criticize. And I think we've talked enough about ensuring that the decision-making rules are clear. For facilitators, we talk about, you know, if you're responsible for designing a meeting, we think like a designer. What are some of the elements of good design? Well, they involve the customer in the design. You go through a series of what's called rapid prototyping. So you try different meeting designs. You don't wait till the night before to design your meeting. You start enough in advance that you can look at various versions of the design. When a group gets stuck, ask the group how they would want to handle the issue. And this comes from another BK author, Marv Weisford, and in the sense of not doing for a group what they can do for themselves. So you always want to keep the autonomy and responsibility with the group. And the other thing I think that's important is to make sure everyone's voice counts, so that oftentimes as a facilitator you can serve as, if the arguments get heated, you can be the person who paraphrases comments so that other people can listen and understand what's being said.
And you can also invite other voices in that might not have been in the discussion.
And then these are tips for contributors. And Emily talked a little bit about this before, but the sense that if you're in the meeting, if you see a meeting going downhill and you don't do anything, then you're contributing to the poor quality of that meeting. And it's easy to blame the leader that it was a lousy meeting, but it's convenient, but it's hardly useful. So one of our colleagues, Barbara Bunker, she always looks at a meeting and she says, what can I do to help make this meeting better? So if it means taking notes, she takes notes. If it means helping people resolve a conflict, it means she does that. If it means moving the agenda along a little bit, she does that. So she's always in there thinking about, okay, what can I do as a participant to make this a better experience? And the last is being open to other viewpoints, so that you may have your reality, but that may not be, quote, the reality, that there are different realities in the room, and how can we understand different people's viewpoints? So again, let's stop here and pause for a few more questions.
Okay, so we have a bunch of questions that have come in. Here's the first one. Great presentation. That's feedback, not a question. And it says, do you have any tips? Do you have any tips for handling polarized conflict in a meeting? This is a great question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And let me ask one clarifying. Is it polarized between two groups, or is it polarized as maybe one person in the rest of the group?
For the sake of this, because I don't have additional information for the question, why don't we say that it's actually two groups against each other?
Okay. All right. So one thing you can begin to if they're really polarized, you can ask the other members of the other group to essentially present the other group's position.
They just kind of switch sides.
So you ask them to say, okay, if I were a member of the other group, I want to argue for that position. How would you argue for that position? Or how would you state their position? And then what you'll usually find is that the listening isn't very good, so that they can begin to, you're working for understanding first and agreement second. And so you keep working to paraphrase until you can get some clear understanding about both groups, about where what the issues are and where they are. The other thing is, if the meeting design makes sense, or if this would make sense in the meeting design, get people to teach each other about their jobs or what's important to them in their work, and maybe form some subgroups where you have members of each group looking at how to improve the work process or the meeting process. So, just in a general way, that's one way to kind of deal with polarization.
Great. And then, why don't we flip it too? So when let's say there's one person in the group who disagrees, and it's created this polarizing relationship between that person and the rest of the group in the meeting. How would you tackle that?
So what we typically do is, I know you have sometimes those folks and they talk a lot. So what I typically do is I say, is there anybody else that feels that way? And you stay quiet for a little bit. And if somebody else feels that way, then you ask them to talk a little bit about it. If nobody else feels that way, then you say, it's really important that you feel that way, and I think everybody's heard you, and nobody else seems to support your perspective, so let's move on.
If you get the person who's continually bringing up their point, and you feel like the point's made, thing to do is again, as Emily was
Restate.
saying, you paraphrase it, and then ask them what part isn't being understood, because it keeps coming up.
Yeah. So actually, Emily, you said something that ties into this next question pretty well, and that is the question of what to do when you have someone in the room who's really taking up a lot of the time with their opinion or perspective.
Well, if I knew that was going to happen before, I would be real clear that everybody had 5 minutes to talk and hold to a ground rule of that, so to speak. I think we probably all run into that as facilitators of meetings. And I think when that happens, I'd go back to what Dick said. If they're continuing to bring up the same issue, I would paraphrase back what they had to say and try to understand what they have to say, to get the understanding of what they're having to say, because a lot of times when people do that, they don't feel understood. And sometimes they're just crazy. Well, that's true. I mean, that's one of the realities I think that we run into, and particularly if you're working in community type situations, you get all kinds of folks in those kind of situations, and you have to be very diplomatic in doing those kind of things. But I think you really have to, one of the things that works for me a lot of times is just telling people they only have X amount of time to make their contribution, and to really holding to that, and then everybody has the same ground rules. But the other one is going for the understanding in a different situation.
What if you, oh, go ahead, Dick, sorry.
Well, you can also, after you've paraphrased, say something like, okay, we'd like to hear what other people have to say on this, and then just kind of go around the room and make space for people to talk. The thing I think that's also important as a facilitator, how you handle this, because even though people may not agree with this person who's taking up a lot of space or dominating the meeting, they're watching how they get treated. And if they are not treated with respect, or they're not treated in a way that even values who they are, people then begin to get the notion that, well, this isn't a safe place to talk about things that maybe not everybody agrees to. So you have to kind of think about two things: how you're working with that person, but then the rest of the group is watching how you're working with that person.
That's good. That's good. So you talked about earlier, Emily, you mentioned giving people a time frame to go over their opinion or spend time on a particular topic. What if you find that you have allotted, let's say, 15 minutes for a topic, but at the end of 15 minutes, there's really a lot of ground to cover that hasn't been covered? What would be the next step with that if you're trying to avoid making the meeting go over time?
I throw the choice back out to the group. I'd say to the group, I know we haven't finished this. I know it's important. What do you want to do? Do you want to extend the time and then not, get to something else on the agenda? What do you think?
Great. Okay, and here's this is actually our last question. Unless anybody has any final questions, I'm going to do one last call for questions here. This question is actually following up on the earlier question we heard about shy people who maybe don't want to speak up. So this is following up on the shy person question. When do you go around the room to get input from each person versus open question to allow whomever feels moved to answer? If not going around the room, what other technique can be used to encourage all voices to be heard?
Well, as part of that going around the room, you can give people a period of time to write the responses to themselves.
For themselves.
For themselves, so that, and for some people that helps organize their thinking and they feel more comfortable. Depending on the size of the group, you might pose a question and just ask people to talk about it with their neighbor. And then ask people to share some of the highlights of their conversation. So those are a couple things you can do to get people to, who might not be talking, to get their voice in the room.
Okay, so this is our final question. And this is kind of a fun one in a way. We've all known the person who doesn't speak up in the meeting, but then afterwards goes back to their desk and maybe talks to another coworker or emails someone privately and says, well, I didn't like this or that, or I disagree with this and that. But obviously they didn't speak up in the meeting. How would you handle a situation like that? And how would you encourage that person to actually share an opinion that they either feel might be controversial or is sort of, as we say, maybe bad mouthing, so that it gets them more involved?
Well, this is a fun kind of one. Sometimes at the beginning of a meeting, I'll say, let's have a pre-mortem, which is as opposed to a post-mortem.
Right.
So let's say all the things we think we're gonna be saying about this meeting at the beginning. Okay, and now and you can take it one step further and then say, well, okay, now how do we prevent this from happening?
Right.
If that's a common issue, a pattern within a group where everybody's talking about the meeting outside of the meeting and not talking about it in the meeting, then you could do a couple things. One, you might do some interviews with people and find out why they're doing that. Another thing you could do is bring it to the group's attention by saying there's a pattern here. Okay, there's a pattern that we've noticed, and what are the causes of that pattern, and what do we want to do about it? And by naming the pattern and bringing it to the group's attention, it gives the groups control over it. Because when it's happening outside of the group, then the group doesn't have any control over it. So that's another thing you can do with it.
That's great. I'd never thought of that before. You could also do that even just in the beginning with going back to that question from earlier about how you decide who should or shouldn't be in the meeting. It sounds like that could be a pre-mortem in a way as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, you could.
Who do we wish we were here who wasn't here, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Or who here doesn't believe they should be here.
Right, exactly.
And if they don't believe they should be there, then maybe they ought to leave.
That's great. All right.
That's one of the things our hero Eric from Lindblad does, is if he sees people in his meetings and their body language looks like they'd rather be somewhere else, he'll ask them, would you rather be somewhere else today?
That's good.
Yeah, maybe they need to be out on the floor attending to some big project or something that's going on.
Right.
And because that happens sometimes. You get pulled off of things that you really need to get done, and he says, go do it.
Yeah. So the key in that is there's no punishment, and that's what makes Eric's approach to meetings really work. So our big message for you at the end here is if you want to continue the discussion, you can contact us by email. You can contact us on our website. I realize we didn't put our phone number on the slide, so when we say we're a click away or as close as our phone, you can get us at 847-251-7361. Again, 847-251-7361. And we'd like you to head for the meeting canoe and hope you use it and let us know what your experiences are with it. So, thanks so much for attending today and being part of the discussion.
Wonderful.
Thank you all. Hope you have a great day.
And thank you guys for joining us. And I want to let everybody know who's listening that we have recorded today's event, so it will be available on YouTube shortly. We will send you a link via email, so you won't have to go hunting for it. You will have the recording from everything from today. Okay. Thank you, Dick and Emily.
Well, thank you, Kat. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.